Today we're back in the health supply boxes for part 2B of this series. Eye care, disbudding, first aid, wound care and injury prevention, a few rarely used kitting supplies, and the storage systems that hold it all together. I've got a couple of stories in here too. A prairie dog hole, a stick coming out of a goat's chest, and a dog that made a decision it quickly regretted. Let's get to it. Hey there, welcome to GoatWise. I'm Millie Bradshaw, animal scientist and rancher. Here we talk meat goats, feeding strategies, goat fencing, and livestock management that holds up in real life. If you care about raising goats well and building systems that actually work, you're in the right place. Let's talk livestock. Before we get into the ranch update, I want to ask you for a quick favor. If this podcast has been useful to you, if you've gotten something out of it that made a difference on your operation, would you take 2 minutes and leave a review on Apple Podcasts? Scroll down to ratings and reviews and just tell people what you've gotten out of the show. That's genuinely one of the best ways to help other serious producers find it. And while you're at it, grab the free kitting due date chart at goatwise.com/kitting-chart. It's free, it's useful, and it'll put you on the insider list so you get the Friday newsletter when it goes out. That's goatwise.com/kitting-chart, or head straight to goatwise.com/join. Links are in the show notes. Here's what's happening on the ranch. We're wrapping up goat sales for the spring. We held back 4 buck kids to grow out for a while and sold the rest. I'm planning to sell our 2 mature Spanish bucks as well, but I'll hang on to them until I've got their replacements lined up. No sense being without a buck. That's just a timing thing. Pigs showed up this week, which always feels like the real start of the 4-H season around here. This is year 12 with my kids, and I still love that spring excitement when the 4-H animals all arrive. This year, we've got 1 steer, 2 goats, and 3 hogs. It's shaping up to be a good year. We also sent 6 hens and a rooster to a new home this week. I've got chicks coming in May, so once those join the flock, our chicken numbers would have gotten a little high. Easier to move some along right now. Our dairy does could start kitting any day. We're checking them a few times daily and keeping a close eye on them. Which ties right into this episode, actually. This is exactly when you want to know where everything is on that shelf. Not the day of, but before things get busy. Pastures are greening up, and it looks like spring showed up early this year. All right, let's pick up where we left off. If you haven't listened to episodes 101 and 102 yet, go back and start there. 101 covered the foundational philosophy of low intervention management, your vet relationship, thermometer, gloves, and basic injection supplies. Episode 102 went through weighing, records and tags, hoof care, banding, kitting tools, and more. This episode is the continuation of that. We're working through what's still on the shelf. So, speaking of the dairy does earlier, we do keep a California mastitis test kit on hand. I rarely reach for it, but when I do need it, I'm really glad it's there. It gives you a fairly definitive read when you test, so it takes the guesswork out of the situation. If you have dairy does, or if mastitis is a known problem in your area, it's worth looking into. I also keep teat infusion cannulas on hand in case I need to get treatment directly into the udder. Not something that comes off the shelf often, but it's there. For eye issues. We used to see entropion pretty regularly in the show goats and some of the dairy goats. Entropion, that's entropion, is inverted eyelids, and it needs to be corrected before it causes damage. Mild cases may correct themselves, but more severe cases need intervention. For us now, it's rare. I think we had 1 case last year in a dairy goat kid. These days, we're more likely to see an eye injury, which is usually from a branch or brush poking a goat in the eye while they're out browsing. For entropion, we use wound clips and the specific forceps required to place them, and then some kind of eye spray or ointment, terramycin, vetricin, or curacin. If the clips alone don't fix it, we'll treat the eye and then patch it. When the patch falls off, they're usually good as new. We covered entropion in detail in episode 43. If that's something you're dealing with, go check that out. Eye injuries get the same treatment minus the clips. They get spray or ointment, and if it's not healing up on its own, we'll go ahead and patch it. The wound clips and forceps earn their spot twice over. If you ever need to close up a wound, you've got what you need already on the shelf. Next is disbudding, which is removing the horn buds before horns develop. I did a whole episode on this back in episode 7, and I'd encourage you to go listen to it because there's a lot to consider and everyone has opinions. We still don't disbud the meat herd at all, but I do disbud the dairy goat kids. Nobody wants dairy goats with horns, wethers or does, so I go ahead and do it. For that, we have a disbudding box, which is what you use to restrain the kid, and a disbudding iron. Basic first aid supplies: gauze, vet wrap, betadine scrub, scalpel handles and blades, forceps, and suture kits. We have a gambrel too, which is for restraining a goat when you're working by yourself. That's the kind of thing that seems unnecessary until the day you need it and nobody else is around. But honestly, most of this first aid stuff doesn't get touched much, and I think that's worth talking about for a minute. The common narrative is that goats are always hurting themselves, always getting into trouble, always finding some creative way to end up in a bad situation. And I'm sure that's true for some operations. But we just don't see much of that around here. And I think the reason is that when we build things, fences, shelters, anything, we try to look at it the way a curious or scared goat would. What will they rub on? What will they try to climb? What will they push against? Where will they stick their head? If you start looking at everything you build through that lens, you start catching things before they become problems. An opening that's the wrong size, a wire end that needs to be bent over and clipped off, wire on the wrong side of a post, a spool or shelter placed too close to a fence line that's going to tempt them to jump. Taking the time to look at your setup from the goat's perspective before the goat does saves you a lot of grief, mischief, injuries, and what can become deadly mistakes. Now, that said, the last accidental death we had was a yearling doe who stuck her head in a prairie dog hole. She had those perfectly sized yearling horns for getting in and not getting back out, and she was stuck good. There's not much you can do about a prairie dog hole, and the last actual injury I treated was probably 5 years ago. A goat had a stick coming out of his chest. When I first saw it, I thought it was just stuck in his hair, so I grabbed it and pulled it out. That's when I figured out it was actually in him. In there a little deeper than I thought. It wasn't bleeding much, so I cleaned the wound, gave him a dose of antibiotics, and he healed up just fine. That's the kind of thing you want to have supplies for because it happens fast and you need to be able to respond. Predator injuries are a different situation. Unless you're skilled at cleaning and closing wounds, it's probably best to get a vet involved. Fortunately, we've been pretty effective at keeping predators away from our goats. When we bought our first show does, our mentor told us the biggest threat to our goats would be town dogs, and he was right. I hear too many stories about a neighbor's dog getting into somebody's herd. Keeping things out is sometimes just as important as keeping your goats in. We used electric netting from the start, and it was very effective. We could hear a dog yelp all the way home after it hit that fence. Occasionally, an overexcited or young livestock guardian dog will wound a goat, usually something minor like a slit ear. But if you have LGDs, watch them closely, especially early on, and make sure they understand what's acceptable. On the wound care shelf, we keep a can of Catron 4 to keep flies off wounds during fly season. Alu Shield aerosol bandage is really nice. Sprays on, creates a protective covering, stays put. Wound coat is another option. And blood stop powder is there for when we need it. That's most often when disbudded kids play too rough and break open a disbudding site. That's rare, but if it's bleeding heavily, I'll cauterize it, and if it's minor, the blood stop powder handles it. You can also use it on a hoof that's been trimmed a little short. Not always necessary. Once they stand on it, they're applying direct pressure to the wound, which is what you want. Keep them on dry ground for a day, and it usually resolves on its own. On the topic of hooves, if you're dealing with hoof rot, that's a more serious situation with its own supplies and its own protocol, and that's a whole other episode. A few kidding supplies that don't come out often, but definitely earn their shelf space. Ketone test strips, dextrose and keto plus gel for ketosis, and CMPK for milk fever. 1/4 inch and 3/8 inch umbilical tape, and a 6-inch Buhner style OB needle for prolapse, and a pair of rounded end forceps. They look kind of like tongs that I use to grasp a head back kid and get it repositioned. We rarely use blankets anymore. Honestly, I'm not even sure where they are at this point. That was a carryover from the show goat days. For a commercial meat goat operation, I think blankets do more harm than good in most cases. Get the kid dry, make sure it's had colostrum, and baby goats can handle a lot more cold than you think. We did use a calf warmer when we hit -20 in January, so I wouldn't get rid of that. But blankets, not something we reach for. So how do we store all of this? I covered the 5-gallon quick grab bucket and the kidding bucket in episode 102. Beyond those, we use a combination of toolboxes, totes, and a couple of different bucket sizes. We use both 5-gallon and 3.5-gallon buckets. 5-gallon mostly for feed. I actually prefer the shorter 3.5-gallon for kidding supplies and tools. You can reach in and find things faster, and it's a better height for a water bucket for goats too, if that happens to be one of your uses. Add a Gamma Seal lid to a 5-gallon bucket and it becomes a solid storage option for health tools. Keeps moisture and pests out and stays accessible. One of the first containers I ever got was a step stool and toolbox combination, and we still use it. It's great to have right in a kidding pen. You can sit on it while you're working with an animal, and your supplies are right there, contained, protected, and off the ground. Beyond that, totes in a variety of sizes organized by category. Bottles, feeding tubes, catheter tip syringes, extra banding supplies, anything kidding related, all in one tote. Tags and tagging supplies together, bandages and first aid in another. When we moved out here, things got pretty disorganized. It's better now, but a lot of the organization happened by default. What gets used regularly ends up being easier to find. That's not the worst system, but I do want to be more intentional about it eventually. One rule we did establish from the start: anything in a glass bottle or anything that will get ruined by freezing gets stored inside. That was the first thing we sorted out after the move, and it's held. Next week, in episode 104, we're getting into medications, and I've got a storage hack for you that I think you'll actually use. I'll see you next week. Hey there, thanks for listening today. If this episode was helpful, share it with another producer who's raising goats. And if you haven't already, leave a quick review on Apple Podcasts. It helps more serious livestock owners find the show. As always, this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for veterinary advice. I'll see you next week here on GoatWise.